Hi, my name is Erik Hawkins, but please call me Hawk. I'm a music production instructor and course developer for Berklee Online, and I'm here today to talk about that big pulsing kick drum sound and bass sound that you hear so often in EDM styles such as electro house, progressive house, and other such big room styles. So I'll first begin by playing you an example of what I cooked up in this style, and then I'll describe how I produced it. Let's get started. So I'm using Live and Reason, and I've got Reason rewired in here. There's my Reason rack. I cooked up a little bass sound here. I love putting together electro house type bass sounds in Reason because I can use a combinator. This one sounds like this. And I'm using two tones here. I'm using a sound from the PX7. That's my raspy tone, my top tone. And I'm using something that's a little deeper and darker and warmer from Korg's Poly 6. I've put them together for this sound. And I've got a little BV vocoder action here to sort of downsample it. I'm just running it through the graphic EQ on the 4-band setting. And then I'm running the whole thing through one of my favorite scream patches here called half-inch. And that's basically it. That's my bass tone. So I'm running it into Live here through the external instrument plugin here. And you can see that I have it assigned to Reason, and I have it assigned to my bass tone. You can do all individual outputs as well. Look at all those individual outputs through this plugin. And I have a basic 4-on-the-floor kick drum pattern with the kick drum on all the downbeats, the 1, 2, 3, 4, and the hi-hat on the upbeats, the and, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then a snare drum on the 2 and the 4 on the backbeats. So let's take a listen to the beat real quick here. So one thing that's really important is you want to be able to get that bass line to throb and push down using sidechain every time the kick drum hits. And the traditional way of doing it would be to use the kick drum as the sidechain input into the compressor. I'm just using the stock compressor in Live here, and I can open up the stock compressor here. It opens up like this. Here's the sidechain input right here. You can turn it on, turn it off, and then you decide which input you want it to see. And I could choose my kick drum. There's my kick drum right there from the track. And that would be the traditional way of doing it. But I like more control than just triggering off the kick drum. And the reason why, there's a couple of reasons why actually. One of the reasons is so that I can continue to get that throbbing bass sound, that downward compression sound, even though my kick drum in my track isn't playing. That's the first reason. And the second reason is so that I can actually use a sine wave on another track to trigger the kick drum. So first let me show you what it sounds like if I remove the kick drum from the mix and I can still hear this throbbing sound. So kick drum's out of the mix, but the downward compression is still triggering it. And that's because I'm using another track to do my triggering for my sidechain. And the other track that I'm using is simply the simple sampler in Live, and I've loaded a sine wave into it. This gives me the ability to downward compress for a specific amount of time. I could downward compress for this amount of time, or I can downward compress for something longer, depending on the duration of the note that I'm holding down. So these notes, that's how long I've decided that I wanted to downward compress. I could grab this note here and I could slide it in like this and compress for a shorter duration. But for this kick drum and this particular sound, I fine-tuned it and decided this was a proper length. So let me play you what that sounds like. If I go to my bass track here, I can actually solo the input sidechain sound if I click on this button right here. And so you can hear how that relates to the kick drum. And the other important thing that I did here was that when that downward compression happens, I actually don't want it sitting exactly on the kick drum. I want it a little bit in front of the kick drum, so there's plenty of space for the downward compression to start happening before the kick drum plays, leaving plenty of space for that kick drum to hit in that pocket of the downward compression. So what I've done is I've taken these notes and I just scooted them up a little bit. You can see that they're not exactly on the grid here. If it was quantized right on the grid, it'd be like that. But I've pushed it a little bit forward. Right there. So now the downward compression is happening just a few ticks before the kick drum. So I want to make sure that the output of this sine wave is not going to my main mix output. So I just turn the channel off, and then the channel is fed over to the sidechain input on the compressor here. And that's how I get that downward compression sound. And the other thing that's really important is that for your bass tone, you want to make sure that it is frequency-wise out of the way of your kick drum. And you figure your kick drum in this style of music is going to be really pumping, have a lot of energy, right around 60 hertz, 80 hertz, pretty much everything under 100 hertz. So you want to be able to look at some sort of spectrum analysis of your bass tone, or just shelve it, roll off the low end. And in Reason here, we have these on the channels, we have these handy spectrum analyzers. So we can look and see what's going on. And I have put a high pass filter on this. I'll turn it off and play the sound so you can hear what it sounds like without the high pass filter. And then I'll turn it on. Let me mute the kick and the snare here. You can see all this energy down here below 100 hertz. But when I put this on, that opens up that frequency space there for the kick drum to shine through. You can hear how it muffles it when it's not, when the high pass filter is not on. And that's how I like to create my big pulsing main room sound, so that the kick and the bass tone are not clashing with each other and really breathing and pumping and filling up that space. So I hope you've enjoyed this technique and have fun with it, and I look forward to hearing what you guys cook up.